There are many reasons on which we cannot comment here for believing that God gave the miracle of writing to men as a means of keeping record through the ages. Writing is as marvelous and subtle a thing in its operation and in its effects as television is. Here we have a means of transmitting not only the deeds but the very thoughts of men through unlimited expanses of space and time. And this amazingly economical and efficient device has been in the possession of the human race from its very beginning. Writing was not devised by men as a tool to help them in their everyday affairs. The most successful businessmen have been illiterates. There is ample evidence that writing was adopted to practical uses only after such uses were found for it. If you bring together all the written records of man's past, you will discover that the overwhelming mass of material is religious in nature, and that the primary purpose to which writing has been put through the ages has not been for business records and correspondence, which are periodically destroyed anyway, and in which writing is employed awkwardly and without enthusiasm, but for the keeping of a remembrance of God's dealings with men.
YouTube off with book again, The Message of Joseph Smith Papyri and Egyptian Endowment, Collected Works of Hugh Nibley, Volume 16. Now this is up on page 2 actually, and I'll just start reading here. It says, But didn't Joseph Smith think he was translating the Book of Abraham from those papyri? I'm not a mind reader, but it's hard to see how Joseph Smith could have thought he was deriving the book from such an impossible source. After all, he knew where it came from, because he produced it. He might have wanted to fool people into thinking that he had translated it from these particular papyri, but if so, why did he never put forth such a proposition? Doesn't the text of the Book of Abraham appear in a number of manuscripts, and the columns running parallel with characters from the Book of Breathings? Yes. The texts were prepared when the brethren at Kirtland were invited to try their skill at translation. In 1835, the prophet's associates, miffed by his superior knowledge and determined to show him up, made determined efforts to match up the finished text of the Book of Abraham with the characters from Joseph Smith Papyrus 11, but they never got beyond the second line of characters. If they were really trying to translate, they soon demonstrated that it simply didn't work, when at the very time they turned savagely against Joseph Smith and told every scandalous thing they could invent about him, none of them ever made mention of his involvement in any of these frustrated exercises. Whatever exercises, discreet or indiscreet, the brethren in Kirtland may have engaged in, the prophet Joseph himself has supplied us with the most conclusive evidence that the manuscript today identified as the Book of Breathings, again, the Book of Breathings, or the sense and text, is that which the facsimiles were found on. Joseph Smith has furnished a clear and specific description of the latter. Quote, the record of Abraham and Joseph found with the mummies is beautifully written on papyrus with black and the small part red ink or paint in perfect preservation. Now note the imperfect preservation. Consider the 3 points in order. First, the Abraham document was beautifully written, and some of the surviving Joseph Smith papyri are indeed nicely and clearly written, and accompanied by well-drawn vignette. I need to learn how to pronounce that word. Such are fragments 2 through 8, and classified in the Improvement era reproductions. If the Book of Breathings text was the only manuscript Joseph possessed, it is just possible that the thrill of having such a treasure could have carried him away to the extent of regarding it as a thing of beauty. But he had a sizable collection of handsome Egyptian documents, compared with which the hastily written and clumsily retouched characters of the Breathings text, in their crowded and uneven lines, can by no stretch of the imagination be called beautifully written. Even the reserved Professor John Wilson, while noting that some of Joseph Smith's papyri were rather prettily written, comments on the coarse appearance of 11 and 10, the Book of Breathings. In the second place, the text which Joseph Smith relates, directly or indirectly, to Abraham contained the rubrics or brief notations in red ink common to Egyptian manuscripts. He is plainly describing a real manuscript, and a rather typical one. And since no one could read it, there is no reason why he should not have described it correctly. Hence the fact that there is not the slightest indication of rubrics in Joseph Smith Papyri 11 and 10, not so much as a speck of red ink. Though such rubrics are common in other Joseph Smith manuscripts, is alone enough to disqualify it as a candidate for the Abraham source. This is no mistake of preservation. Moreover, for the longest of all books of breathings, one closely associated, we shall see with this one, is also free of rubrics, apparently an intentional omission.
Now, to address the question regarding the Joseph Smith Papyri and the Sen text, the breathing text, we just read where it was pointed out that Joseph Smith gave a description of the papyrus from which he pulled the Book of Abraham from as being pretty different from the Sen or the breathing text that we find the facsimile on. This is kind of a put together of the various texts. So you notice that these numbers don't exactly correlate here. The JSP1 is where the lion bed motif scene is on, that facsimile that is in the Book of Abraham. And then we have the text that correlate with it. And this is demonstrates the fragments as put together and all these missing segments projected. But this constitutes the breathing text, what is considered the funerary text, and for which they have the translation, which does not match up with the Book of Abraham. But so pay attention here. This is JSPX, or the Joseph Smith Papyrus 10, and this is Joseph Smith Papyrus 11, and Joseph Smith Papyrus 1. And again, these are this is the breathing text, papyrus, and it was pointing out how they are not in good shape relative to the other papyrus that Joseph Smith had. Now I'm going to be showing some color stuff of these, so this gives you some idea of what we're referring to when we say Joseph Smith Papyrus 10, Joseph Smith Papyrus 11, and Joseph Smith Papyrus 1, because there are other papyrus numbers that we'll be showing, and we'll be able to demonstrate how different they look. And notice as Nibley pointed out, the unevenness of the writing on these, how fragmented and how crowded they are, how just generally kind of disorderly they are, and just how in bad repair this thing is. There's a closer up of that facsimile 11. Then we'll look at the color plates here.